Sometimes our characters don't put two and two together. Often that happens because we're trying to build suspense. We don't want to reveal too much to the reader too early. And believe me, I get it. In fact, in today's episode of Behind the Scenes, I'll show you an example where I did just that. This sort of thing often happens because we're trying to build toward a big reveal, some impactful moment. The trouble is, when readers feel like the characters are acting dumb, they lose faith in them. And if it's bad enough or happens too often, they'll start to feel the author's hand at work. And we absolutely do not want that. So we're going to talk about that plus several other common mistakes we authors make. So stick around. Hey, if you're new to the channel, I'm Brad Beaulieu, and I'm a full-time fantasy and science fiction author with a dozen novels, tons of short stories, and 20 plus years of experience in the field of writing. I started a novel approach to share hard-earned lessons on writing, editing, publishing, and the business of writing, so you, hopefully, don't have to go through the same pain I did. If that sounds up your alley, be sure to hit subscribe, and if you find this video useful, I hope you'll like, share, and maybe even buy me a coffee on ko-fi.com. Link in the description below. Before we dive in, I do want to mention that Behind the Scenes is a bit of an experiment. My basic approach here is to take a 1-hour editing session from my own work and pull lessons from it so you can see more practical examples of writing mistakes and how to fix them. That said, I'm not sure how useful it will actually be to you, so let me know in the comments below, and if you have suggestions on how to tweak the format, I'm all ears. Okay, so let's dive in. As I mentioned in the opening, I'm taking a scene from a book I'm currently writing. This is book 3 of a dragon-based epic fantasy, and this is a scene that has several different characters. Rhiannon is the main character. She's the POV character. And they're off to find someone, their lady, a very powerful wizard in this world, and she's gone missing on purpose. She doesn't want to be found, but the characters don't know that yet. And so in this scene, they're just setting off on their dragons to go find her, and they have a character named Drummond. Drummond is a very colorful character, and he is a pathfinder. He uses these smudge wands to try to find people. One of the things that you're looking for in scenes is to keep them lively, to keep the characters fresh in the reader's minds, but also to give them some flavor, make them a little bit bigger than life. And because Drummond is this colorful character, I do want him to stand out a bit more, a bit differently than the other characters. And so just to get our feet wet, I want to show you this first change. And so it's a small change. I'm just changing the way that he's saying things. It's actually the same words more or less, but he's delivering it in a slightly different style that makes him stand out a bit more. And so he says, finding things you know nothing about is tricky, very tricky. And so it's just a little bit different than before. And so I'm embellishing, I'm making this a bit larger than it was. And that's something important to do, to figure out who your characters are, what they're like, and to make those characteristics stand out in the text. This next change is also about Drummond, but it's more about the physicality of him. I mentioned in a previous video on dialogue that you want to keep the scene alive, and you do that through physical beats. And in those beats, you describe how the characters are interacting with one another and the setting itself, and you also drop in little hints, little reminders of what they look like to kind of make the characters come alive again. I mentioned a strobe effect in that dialogue video. And when you first describe characters or setting, things are very bright, but they dim as the scene goes on, and so you want to refresh that over time. And so here I'm just trying to give a sense of Drummond and remind readers that he has this bulbous nose and try to fill in the area around the fire that they're sitting around before they leave to find this powerful lady, Lady Uriel, the next morning. Anyone who follows this channel knows that I'm a big believer in adding tension to your scenes to make the pages really fly by for the readers. In this case, we have a scene that follows a previous one where Drummond detected through his magic that somebody was following them. In here, they're kind of getting ready to, again, head off after Uriel, and I don't want things to get too relaxed. I want to remind the characters and the readers that there's danger. And in order to do that, I wanted them to be able to have this short exchange that kind of explains the world a little bit, that also shows what sort of the pecking order is between these characters. Two of them are warrior women. Rhiannon has just joined their group. They're known as the Seven, and they're the protectors of Uriel. they're off to find Uriel, but somebody is following them, and I want them to think about who that is. I want them to take precautions, and that just helps give the reader some sense of what the danger is and what they can do about it. And so it's one small hint here, talking about how far the danger is and setting up watch for the night. It's not a huge amount of tension, but it is some, and it helps build on other hints that I've laid for tension, and also helps to build tension as the story moves along. If I have fewer of them, it just creates a lower tension scene. And the more I add, the more hints that I have, and the higher that I increase the danger at each turn, at each reminder, the more the reader is going to feel that. So you want to keep that in mind as you're working through your scenes. And again, in that video on tension, it's not always, say, an action sort of tension where people are fighting or arguing. There are all kinds of different tension. And so this is kind of a suspense, like who's following them and why are they following? How close are they? What's going to happen when they arrive? That sort of thing. And I just want to remind the reader that it exists and that these characters are capable and ready to do something about it. So this next change is between largely a character named Dervish, who is one of the seven. She's a flame wielder. She has flames that appear on her, the blade of her sword, and Maladox, who is a red knife. He's like a freedom fighter in the Holt, and he's rough and tumble. He's big and burly. He has not had a lot of romance in his life. And in the previous book, I had set up an interaction between Maladox and Dervish, hinting at romance, but I didn't actually pursue that in that book. But now in this book, book 3, so that was book 2 when they kind of got to know each other a little bit. Here, I need to expand on this a bit, A, because I just want to show the deepening relationship between these two characters, but also because I, as the author, know that something devastating is going to happen to Dervish later on in the story. And she hasn't had a lot of page time. And so I need that. I need her and Maladox to have some personal interactions with one another. I need to let the reader know what she's like a little bit more, and Maladox, so that they can feel for both Dervish and Maladox after this devastating thing happens. And just to be clear about it, and sorry if I'm giving spoilers, but I think I need to. So Dervish is going to die in service to the Seven, trying to protect Uriel, who they're going after, and also the other people in this group. Maladox himself, Rhiannon, Snow on the Mountain, and Drummond. And so in order for the reader to feel for not just the loss of Dervish, but feel for the characters who are left behind, who are then grieving for Dervish, I have to give her page time. And the way that I wanted to do that was by expanding on this romantic angle between her and Maladox. And the way I chose to do it here is to show them in this slightly awkward, for Maladox anyway, interaction where she's inviting him into her tent. And Maladox isn't used to this, and he feels awkward in front of other people. And so I already had it. This is an edit, of course, but it's a first draft edit, as all of these are, in fact. I may eventually show things like going from a third or fourth draft to a near final draft, but this is like the first major step from a pretty rough, raw draft into the next step forward. So what we end up with is something like this in the end. And it just takes things a step further. I think it advances Maladox's emotions, and also Rhiannon's and Drummond's too, and Dervish. It just expands on them a little bit more, makes the story feel more lived in as I paint this interaction, this, again, slightly awkward romantic interaction between these two characters. All in service towards making an emotional impact later on. And now. I want both. I want readers to feel for them now and later when Dervish falls to Phaedron in this climactic battle. Okay, so the final edit that I want to show you from this editing session is a bit difficult to explain, and that's because it involves two parts of the chapter. And let me start with this. This is early on in the chapter, and this comes after Drummond in the previous chapter identified that somebody was following them. And so this picks up right after that. And it shows them as not really sure who's following them. They are worried. So I'm trying to create stress. That was my initial purpose. And later I had planned on revealing that it's Phaedron, but that comes chapters later. But let me show you this second section. They discover that someone is following them. They camp for the night because they have been traveling for some time by this point. And then the next morning they check again. Drummond checks again to see if someone is, whoever they are, is still following them, and he says yes. And only then does Rhiannon come up with the idea that it might be Phaedron or another Paragon. And these Paragons are very powerful wizards. They're being compelled to fight one another by a god. And in fact, Yariel is one of them. That's the lady that they're after. The trouble with this is that this paints them as a bit thick, a bit dumb. They would have thought of the idea of one of the Paragons following them right away. And so the lesson here is that you want to make sure that you're not painting your characters as dumb. You never want your reader to come up with some solution before the characters do, or at least before they've thought about it. Now, that's not to say that you won't have maybe some thick characters here and there, but you want to pick and choose those battles very carefully. You want to paint your characters as capable. And so if there's something that they should have thought of earlier, then go ahead and do that. Make them think about that earlier. And then they can think about the implications earlier and add the stress into the text to show them as worried about it. That'll just help with the stress and the tension of the scene. You just want to be really careful about painting your characters as incompetent in their fields of expertise, right? And in this case, they would absolutely know. And so I'm taking some of the realizations that they have from the following day and moving it forward to the first day and thinking about it immediately. So here's where we end up. I have Dervish instead of Rhiannon because I want them all to be painted as competent. Ask if it's Phaedron or Astrages. So that's right up front. This is in that early in the chapter. And Drummond shakes his head. He doesn't know. So Dervish says, well, what can you tell us? And he says that someone's following us. He can't really tell the nature of the person that's following them at that point. Pathfinding doesn't allow him to do that, his magic. And Rhiannon in the first incarnation is the one who asked that question about Phaedron or Astrages, but here she has this realization, if it is a Paragon, maybe they're following them to get to Yariel. So their enemies could be using them to get to the person they're trying to save in Yariel. I hope those examples prove useful to you in your own writing. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll like and share news about a novel approach with other writers and writer groups. We're a small but growing channel, and every bit helps. If you do want more instruction on writing in general, I have a Mastering Fiction series which you can look at. I'll put the link right here. For more videos like this, plus deeper dives on writing, editing, and publishing, be sure to hit subscribe. I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, dream big, stay positive, and keep writing. Peace, everyone.